I'm Chance Dorland, and this is The Docket, our weekly interview program covering law and crime in San Antonio from expressnews.com. Brought to you today by the law offices of Pat Maloney. Convicted child killer Genene Jones, dubbed the Angel of Death nurse for killing a toddler in the 1980s, was in a San Antonio courtroom this week. To find out more about these new developments, I'm joined once again by San Antonio Express News courts and crime reporter Elizabeth Zavala. Liz, great to have you back here on the show. This is a new case, but obviously one with important and well-known ties to the past.
Yes, this is something that has stuck around since the 1980s here in Bexar County and in the South Texas area, but also nationally and internationally. So what we learned this week is that a psychologist found her to be competent to go to trial. And her attorney, Cornelius Cox, challenged those findings, and he wants another psychiatric evaluation, which is going to take place. But as you said, there were new developments, namely a peek at what may come should she be tried in Bexar County.
So let's make sure that everyone's caught up with what happened in the past. This is a case that we'll discuss here in a moment, Elizabeth. There are new charges, but this initial charge and really kind of the story that goes along with it, well known, but it really would be important, of course, to go back through some of these details.
Yes, it really is, Chance, because, there's still a lot of people, because this is almost a 4-decade-old case, that really don't know about Genene Jones. She is 68 years old now, and she worked at hospitals in San Antonio and for a Kerrville pediatrician in the 1980s. And she was convicted in 1984 and sentenced to 99 years in prison for killing Chelsea McClellan. She was 15 months old from Kerrville, and she died in 1982 after she had gone to a clinic and she received an overdose of muscle relaxers that were given to her by this nurse. And Jones also was convicted in Bexar County of injury to a child causing serious bodily injury and actually sentenced to 60 years in prison for giving an overdose to Rolando Santos in 1982. Now, that infant was 4 weeks old when that happened, but he survived. So Jones served both sentences at the same time. But because of a law that passed while she was incarcerated that was designed to, ease the crowding at prisons, she was actually set to be released early under this law, and that should have happened in March of 2018.
And so the reason these new charges were put into effect, and this was actually under the previous district attorney, now there's a new district attorney. I'll let you explain kind of what all that means. But that's why these new charges exist, because she may have been released from prison had there not been new issues that need to be taken care of in the legal system.
Yes. Former Bexar County District Attorney Nicholas LaHood brought 5 new murder charges that he presented to 2 separate grand juries in 2017. So Jones was newly indicted on these charges. She is accused of the death of Joshua Sawyer on December 12th, 1981, Richard Ricky Nelson, 8 months old, on July 3rd, 1981, Patrick Zavala, who was 4 months old and died January 17th, 1982, Rosemary Vega, who was 2 years old when she died on September 16th, 1981, and Paul Villarreal, who was 3 months old when he died on September 24th in 1981.
Now, these are the deaths that are connected to these new charges, but authorities maintain that this woman could be responsible for even more than 60 deaths, correct?
Yes, there have been, um, you know, Nico LaHood had definitely used that tally. Uh, it could be that high, he said. I have heard other reports from people saying that it could be 40 even, but my gosh, Chance, I mean, the thought of anyone, much less a nurse, a pediatric nurse who is charged with, taking care of, you know, ill children in a pediatric ward at a hospital. I mean, who can really wrap their mind around that anyway? But when you bring into it the fact that she might have killed up to 60 people or 60 children, babies, it is just, it's just amazing and a lot for people to really grasp.
And so, of course, when you think of numbers like you just mentioned, obviously quite a tragedy, but also, it's not a huge leap for someone to think, what's the mental state of someone who'd be accused of this? That was something that was discussed this week in court. Tell me about that.
Yes. Well, he underwent a psychiatric evaluation, which, it's a two-part thing. They will check you on competency issues, and then they will check you on sanity issues. But what we discussed or heard rather in court this week was about the competency issue. Now, the reason that Cornelius Cox wanted for this to occur is that she's alleged to have confessed at least 3 times to overdosing babies in her care. At one point, admitting that she killed the babies because she heard voices in her head. And that actually was from testimony from one of the former prosecutors on the case last year. And so Cornelius filed 2 motions, one for a speedy trial and another asserting violation of his client's right to due process, both of which were denied. But what Cornelius Cox also wanted was to be sure that her psychiatric evaluations were completed, because through the years that she had been incarcerated, she is reported to have had a series of strokes. And, you couple that with the allegations that she says that she has voices in her head that could have told her to kill the babies at the time, or, that could be happening, currently, made it so that Cornelius Cox wanted for her to be checked.
And then also the new DA that you've already briefly mentioned, he has put on the table the idea of a plea bargain, correct?
Yes. After the hearing was over, Joe Gonzalez, who's the new Bexar County District Attorney, and Cornelius Cox both addressed media and were allowing us to, ask them a ton of questions after this hearing that actually, it was actually a very short hearing. But with Joe Gonzalez's new administration in place, he has put new prosecutors on this case. And after the hearing, it seemed from what both sides said that they actually could weigh a plea bargain, though a lot of things need to happen first, like, like we've discussed, she first of all needs to be declared competent by a judge. And that really likely won't happen until there is a jury trial regarding that issue. So, if this new competency evaluation comes back and she has, the new psychologist or psychiatrist who does that finds her competent, Cornelius could challenge that again and then ask for a jury of her peers to come and decide on that. And and if she is said by this new doctor to be incompetent, well, then they pretty much have to go through that process again because, competency is very different from a sanity issue. So, but the fact that they said that they could weigh a plea bargain is definitely new information for us. But one also that Joe Gonzalez said would not happen unless he had involvement from the families of the victims. So he was very particular about that. He said that, everything is on the table, but, he wasn't going to make any big decisions unless he had, without the involvement of, the mothers of these children and family members.
And then maybe finally here, Liz, before we say goodbye, a little bit more of discussion on this whole idea of competency. A lot of the times when you hear about trials, or even if you're watching something like Law and Order, which we've talked about a few times here on the podcast, and how that connects to real life sometimes, and other times not so much. Competency is a person's state at the time of whatever's going on legally, so that the person knows what's going on, that they could enter a plea, that they understand what's happening around them. And if someone is found not to be competent, you can actually wait a certain amount of time and wait until they're found to be competent and then move forward with whatever's happening legally, correct?
Yes, it's very, that's exactly right. When Joe Gonzalez was talking to us after the hearing, he said he and his team believe that Genene Jones is competent, but they have to wait for the findings of the second assessment. Even if these cases don't go to trial because the plea deal is reached, he said competency still is an essential finding because, as you said, she has to be aware of what's in front of her. She has to be competent enough to understand the consequences of the plea deal. And even at the most basic level, she has to be able to participate in her own defense with her defense attorneys. So incompetency at times can be confused with insanity, but experts point out that they are two distinctly different things. And I did a story a couple of years ago about this very thing, and I spoke with Jerry Ramey, who is a law professor at St. Mary's University. And he pointed out that insanity usually focuses on the mental state at the time of the offense. And incompetence doesn't mean that you are now free to go. It means that you'll probably be held in confinement for treatment until you are, evaluated again. And then a doctor says you are competent to go to trial. So if a jury were to find Jones incompetent, she would be sent to an institution for, maybe up to about 120 days or so, or longer if necessary. But once that person regains competency, no matter how long it might take, Dr. Ramey says that person returns to court and everything resumes as it had been before that competency or incompetency designation had been made.
And then wrapping things up here, Liz, I guess the final question would be, what's next? When might we hear about this now second look at Genene Jones' competency?
Well, when I spoke with Cornelius after the hearing, I asked him that very question, how long is this psychiatric evaluation going to take? Because, when we talked about Genene Jones' last chance, I think it was probably last summer. And at that time was when the psychiatric evaluation had been requested. And at that time, Cornelius had pointed out that it was going to take some time because, if you recall, he's been incarcerated for 3 decades. And he said that there's a lot of boxes of medical records from her time in prison that needed to be reviewed. So we went from summer to now January of the new year, and we had the results of this examination. But the doctors that are going to be doing this, the one who did the first psychiatric evaluation was Michael Jooms. And the second person that, in fact, Cornelius requested to do the second evaluation is Dr. Brian Scott. And Cornelius said that he did not think that the second evaluation would take as long, because this doctor has to look at what the other doctor reviewed, but also compare, I guess, his report to the other doctor's report. And Cornelius said that both doctors who have contracted with Bexar County and have worked in the courts for many years are known by reputation. So he felt confident that this would not take as long as the first did. So we could be discussing this, I would say probably within the next couple of weeks, maybe a month or so. So I would say stay tuned, because there's a lot of people that are going to be watching what's going to be happening with Genene Jones, especially the moms and the relatives of the children in the San Antonio case.
And thank you to San Antonio Express News courts and crime reporter Elizabeth Zavala for joining me for today's episode of The Docket, our weekly interview program covering law and crime in San Antonio from expressnews.com, brought to you today by the law offices of Pat Maloney. For the San Antonio Express News, I'm Chance Dorland.